Hi again everyone, Rebecca is always on this end, and I'm here for another comparison video. This time we'll look at how different magazines design interviews and lists. ONTAP doesn't generally have as many interviews or lists as features as with most magazines, but they are popular articles, so I thought it'd be helpful to take a gander into how these designs differ from feature designs. Let's start with interviews in commercial magazines. If you've already watched the comparison of feature articles, you know how much I love this opening spread. It's also a little more my style. I like the leftmost side to be picture heavy and have text on the right side, but that's just a matter of my preference. Like the articles we looked at in the other comparison video, this also has the blurb, which I like. On the inside, the layout is pretty much exactly like other Vanity Fair designs. Middle of the page pull-out quote, very large drop cap at the beginning of a new section. So then we'll just look specifically at the interview portion. The first time introduced, Vanity Fair refers to itself, then uses the initialism VF from then on. Also, Vanity Fair and VF are italicized. For others, their names are used throughout, in this case Julia and Mike, instead of just JR for Julia Roberts. The names are in small caps and bolded without any indent. Overall, the interview starts with an overview of Julia Roberts' career, and then talks about her work with Mike Nichols, and then moves right into the interview where Vanity Fair asks a question and either Julia or Mike answer. And notice sometimes it's not even questions. This is very much a conversational piece between the Vanity Fair interviewer, Julia Roberts, and Mike Nichols. So now let's look at a nylon interview. Nylon also has the short introduction before the interview. Just like Vanity Fair, this short introduction catches the reader up on the interviewee's career. Then both interviews hop into the actual conversation. This short interview is really well designed overall also. The photo still manages to get half of the page, and the title is interestingly placed. The design even allows for a short blurb before the interview. For the actual interview part, instead of using names, they bold and darken the font of the questions while the answers are in regular gray font. What I think makes this interview design differently is how the interview is actually conducted. The Vanity Fair interview was most likely face-to-face. The author probably had some idea of questions he or she wanted to get answers for, but otherwise, the interview probably worked more like a guided conversation that was recorded. This interview looks more like an email interview, or perhaps a very short face-to-face one, so your design might depend mostly on how you were able to conduct your interview. So let's take a look at some of the interviews that have come into ONTAP. Though this is more of a conversation than an interview necessarily, a lot of the same principles apply. This design, however, meets only a few of them. The back and forth starts very abruptly with the line, "This can't be happening." While intriguing, just one or two sentences about what these two were talking about would have been very helpful to our readers. Also, the photo on the top is very hard to make out. There's so much blank space up there. I wish the designer would have used more of the black part of the box for the picture. He or she could have used the title to the side format like we saw in the nylon design. This picture could have been larger and in the center of the black part with Battle of on one side and the sexes on the other, or the picture could have been more to the right and the whole title to the left. The title text could have been turned sideways like in nylon's design too. And instead of seeing bylines, I think the Vanity Fair use of full names, or even just the full name the first time and the initial for the rest of the time, would have been much more streamlined. So let's look at another ONTAP interview. This is a short interview that followed a longer article. Like my conjecture about the nylon interview, it was conducted via email, so the questions are just posted with answers. The questions are all in the same font and color, but I'm not the biggest fan of the arrangement. I like the inclusion of a photo with the interview, but realizing this is an interview is a little difficult. Again, it's coming at the end of the article about a visit from Dorian Locks, but just glancing at this, it doesn't look like an interview. I'd like to see more standard columns first. Then the color boxes wouldn't be necessary, and the text boxes would all be the same width. I do like that one answer is a little bit more pronounced than the others, but that question could have easily been posted at the end of the interview, and then the answer could have been designed almost as a pull-out quote. So I did a quick redesign of the interview following these guidelines, and this is what it looks like. This is much better. Now, just by glancing, it looks like an actual interview. All of the elements are there: the photo, the highlighted answer to one question, the color scheme from the article it followed, but it looks like an interview, and it's organized instead of scattered across the page. So now that we've looked at some interview designs, let's take a quick look at some lists. Normally lists come in the form of just a series of pictures. Think about those top buys for this season type articles. So let's see how commercial magazines do it. The first thing I notice about this list in Vanity Fair is the title. I like the design in lieu of just text. I also like that there's a little description of the list. It's just stuff they liked. So let's look at some of the specifics of this design. I notice that it's basically a 4x4 grid. In the first row, the topmost, leftmost item takes up 2 columns, and the other 2 items take up 1 column each. The second row has an item in the first column, and the title in the middle takes up 2 columns. The top part of a fourth item takes up the last column. This item takes up 2 spaces vertically, so the third row has a similar layout as the first. A 2-column horizontal item, a 1-column item, and then a 1-column item, which is the bottom of this 2-space vertical item. And the fourth row mimics the second row: a 1-column item, a 2-column item, and a 1-column item. While the items look haphazardly placed initially, there's actually a very precise pattern to it all. This pattern is important in making the design look organized, but you can play with your pattern to make it look random as well. I really like this design, so now let's look at how Nylon does a list. This list is definitely more random than the Vanity Fair one. I like it as well, but this would probably take more time than an organized design. This would take a lot of trial and error, but when you find the right balance, it looks really nice. So we have a title again with a little bit of a description of the products. Then everything is sort of placed on the page so that it still gives each item a surrounding white space, but the design is not working on a grid. Some parts of it look very aligned, like the bottom third of the page, but following the products up vertically from any point at the bottom show that none of these items are in an exact grid. I think this works just as fine as the Vanity Fair design, but again, finding this perfect balance might take more time than something a little bit more structured. So finally, let's look at an on-tap list. So this isn't quite the same as the list of products from Nylon and Vanity Fair, but the design should still follow some of the basic principles. Here, the items are text instead of photos. However, when text are items, you definitely want to go for the grid option. None of the text in this design lines up. None of the boxes share vertical or horizontal alignment. I like the use of color and text variants and photos in the design, but I'd like to see more organization as far as the text alignment goes. If these were products rather than the text, the random design could fit, but here we need a little organization. So at this point, I think we've pretty well covered the most popular types of articles in this and the previous video, which covered the basic feature article. If you find that your article isn't quite a feature, interview, or a list, look at all of the characteristics and figure out what design would best present the article you are designing. Also, as always, look through some magazines. As you work with OnTap, make it a point to look through magazines regularly. Look at the designs and decide if you like them or not, and what informs your opinion about those designs. Find designs that look really interesting and try to mimic them. Most of all, don't ever be afraid to try something new.